Over lunch, we heard some discussions about how to get started. We've heard a lot of stories today about projects that have been moving forward, efforts that have been going on for years, but even in those communities that maybe are the furthest forward, there are still problems that we haven't even started to tackle. So I'm excited now to invite Curt Savoie to come up to the stage. Curt directs the Global Smart Cities Strategy Program for IDC. He spent his entire career in data with analytics, privacy, ethical uses of data, really looking at data from any angle that you can look at it, and also has over a decade of experience in the public sector. So the perfect person to come up and talk to us a little bit about smart city implementation strategies. So thank you, Curt.
All right. Hello, everybody. So I'm with IDC. I'm a consultant, which I know how that sounds. But like he said, I worked in government for 10 years. I was in Boston for 8, Commonwealth of Massachusetts for almost 3. So I spent a lot of time in the trenches and doing that kind of work exclusively with data, open data, data science, analytics, all of the things that are data. So I'm going to talk to you about strategy, implementation, some of the things you see good and bad with smart cities. But let's start. I had a client recently who pretty much, his language was a little more colorful than this, but he's like, what even is a smart city, right? What do we mean by that, right? And you've seen a little bit of that today in how people define smart cities, and that's not uncommon. IDC's definition, it's really about digital transformation, right? It's about, the fact that people today interact with government through their phones, through their computers, through the web, through just being in an environment that is wired with IoT, with sensors, with digital technologies, that is optimized through data science, right? That's how people interact with government and the world around them. That is what smart cities are about. And all of these components play into that, right? Mobility, transportation, energy, environment, smart homes, right? Like, you don't think of that as a government function, and it's not, but how does that integrate? Whether you're talking about Alexa skills or some other way to interface with government, right? Healthcare, not so much in the United States, but in a lot of other countries, healthcare and health is very much a part of the government smart city, smart government space, right? These are not separate things. So you're seeing smart ecosystems, smart verticals, smart stadiums, smart communities, right? Like these are a whole ecosystem of technologies that come into play. And just to kind of frame what we're talking about, this is a quote that I think about a lot in terms of these different technologies. If we shape buildings, thereafter they shape us. Right? So we're wiring up these systems, right? Whether it's, 311, smart buildings, sensors, whatever it is, and we want to shape the environment. We want to provide a better experience, better public safety, better outcomes, but these things also shape us. And here's an example of that. There's a city in America that is very involved with testing autonomous vehicles. And they did, good PR, let the public know you're gonna see vehicles with nobody driving them, so don't freak out, right? Like, great, they're doing this good stuff, very futuristic, very forward thinking. Well, there's a side effect they never thought about. Nobody cares about crosswalks anymore because autonomous vehicles have sensors and will stop. So people really quickly learned, I can just jaywalk, I can walk out in front, the car will stop. I don't need to think about it. So here we have technology is shaping us, but we're also shaping the technology of how does that change urban planning, right? Why even put crosswalks in if nobody's going to use them anyway? How do you have traffic flow if people are just walking in front of cars and they're stopping all day long? How do you do some of these things where you have these new technologies, but then the people's behavior that you were counting on adapts and changes, right? So you have these other things that are coming out. So I'll come back to this quote later, but thinking about how we do this, this is very important. So how do we start to define and narrow a vision, right? Whether you're talking about, data or autonomous vehicles or different kinds of connectivity, how do you do that, right? And these are some of the things that, IDC likes to help people think about as they're going down their journey with smart cities. These 5 areas here, right? So vision on this side, of course, my favorite, data on the other side. process, culture, technology. All of these are vital pieces that if you are, and what we do is we assess clients on their maturity in all of these areas. They're like, okay, you have a really strong culture, but your tech is behind. Or, you have really good vision, but your data isn't secure, right? Like, so we try to find where people are at and help them craft that. So you could be strong in any number of these or none of these or all of these, right? And that's going to change how you proceed down your smart city journey, right? So find your strengths, know your balance, right? Back when I was at the city of Boston, I would like to say we were probably strongest in vision, and, I like to take credit for the data, but it wasn't me. And process was a little bit wonky in the bill, and culture also became a strong thing. Groups like the New Urban Mechanics, which are legendary in the innovation space in cities, right? These are people that brought the culture, right? So how do you do these things? How do you bring them all together and think about use cases? How do you think about increasing culture, working with, I got a shout out to the person here from the brigade, right? How do you work with Code for America and the civic tech community? How do you do those sort of things to build that culture of innovation? How do you have process? How do you onboard new projects? How do you think about new projects and opportunities? We've heard a lot today about public-private partnerships. Gotta say, I'm not 100% on board with them. And it's not because nefarious reasons or bad things or can't do really good things, but because I find government isn't always asking the right questions, isn't always fully leveraging their position in that partnership to get the best value for their constituents and the vision that they bring. So these are some of the areas that, you really have to think about. And with that, the use cases. I know this is a little small, so can't get into that too much, but from the left to the right, what we did is break down use cases in a taxonomy, right? So which taxonomies are related thematically, technology-wise, platform-wise, right? How do you think about some of these? And these are some from, state government, federal government. There's also ones we have elaborated for cities specifically. And you see down the left-hand side some of those different strategic areas, right? And if you're in government, you're going to notice that a lot of these things are probably very close to what you're thinking about as priorities: economic development, modernized platforms, public safety, better constituent engagement and service delivery, right? Like all of these sort of things, and then money management, revenue, tax collection, whether you're talking about like property taxes, assessing, income taxes if you're at the state level, right? Like how do you monitor all those things? And what are the right portfolios of technologies to even consider, right? Never mind, how do you get them to work together, which is another huge barrier, right? So looking at your use cases and starting there and going from that, right? That is important, like as you're building process and technology and culture and you're thinking about your roadmap, why are you doing it? For a good press release? Okay, that's not a bad reason, but what's the real driver? And where are we going, right? So let's talk future stuff. I love talking about the future and interesting new technologies, right? Like I get bored with dashboards. So it's like I've been doing that for a long time. It's old news, right? So how soon, what's happening now? Things like this are happening now. Chatbots, right? You're seeing 311 enabled with chatbots and other things like Alexa, right? You're seeing body cams, video analytics for public safety, and even in transportation, right? You're seeing these sort of operations, which as soon as you talk that, the server space, the analytics power you need to do that effectively just magnifies, right? So how do you do that? Transportation mobility, right? Like things like Uber and Lyft came on the scene and changed the game. Now we have scooters and all kinds of different mobility on demand sort of technologies. How is that going to continue to shape the environment, right? These are all things that are happening right now. And then of course you have smart lighting and IoT and sensors. From a data science perspective, auditing, right? Like how do you find non-compliance in the tax world? How do you target people who are neglecting properties that you need to send inspectional services to? How do you find these people, right? Like these are things that are happening all around the world right now with technology that people have or are buying and developing, some with partnerships, some with academics, some with the civic tech community. These are the sort of things that people are really working on and working towards. But what's coming, and this isn't that far out, right? Autonomous vehicles, Blockchain, I know that gets a lot of hype, but there are use cases for it that I think are interesting. Cybercrime, right? Baltimore got hit with ransomware. It shut down a massive part of the city operations, right? Like, these are huge issues that are only going to get worse, right? That's a question of tech, of, having the right process. Like, when an incident happens, how fast do you respond? What is your response? How fast things are changing is mind-blowing, right? Anyone who says they have all the tech answers and can keep up with it, they are lying. It is moving so quickly. And with government, that's doubly hard because you don't have the budget, you don't have the staff, and it takes a much longer time to get going. By the time you've installed something, it's probably outdated, right? So all of these things are governments dealing with, and not just from what they implement or use, but also what they need to regulate, right? So it's like autonomous vehicles. Okay, in the case I gave, do you change your urban planning? How do you regulate that? What do you allow for vehicles to drive on city streets? What are the implications if you do, right? In the Boston Globe the other day, there was a picture of someone driving down the Mass Pike in their Tesla, completely passed out, asleep at the wheel, right? Having a nice nap in traffic, which, sure, that sounds all right, but how do you regulate that? What if the car crashes? Who gets the ticket? Whose insurance is paying? I don't know, right? These are questions that are coming up, right? And if we don't start thinking about these things now, we're going to be stuck. We're going to be behind, and catching up is going to be even more difficult. So what do we expect in moving forward, right? What is going to get in our way as government practitioners trying to bring these visions, right? Hopefully not the train wreck, but I've seen that happen plenty of times too, right? So what gets in our way? Procurement gets in our way. I've never met anyone who likes the procurement process who doesn't work in a procurement office. I think those are the only people into it. It is what it is, and you need to work with those cycles, right? RFPs are time consuming, and not only are they time consuming from a process, they are time consuming from how do you ask the right questions? How do you make sure that the vendors responding are responding with what you really need and not just what they have and trying to find a solution, for a problem you're not quite sure how you want to solve, right? How do you develop that, right? Lack of funding, you could get capital money maybe. How do you operationalize it? Can you monetize it in some way? That's really hard, right? Privacy concerns. We released free Wi-Fi in Boston years ago. We got a very supportive, excited, and questioning letter from our friends at the ACLU, who were like, this is great. What data are you collecting? We didn't know. We're like, we installed the transponders? We don't know. Oops. So knowing those privacy concerns would be like, how do we mitigate those, right? IT skills gap, right? It's moving so fast that, and especially with things like data, Google can't hire enough data people. How is a small city going to do it, right? It's very hard. So you have to be really strategic where headcount is the cardinal sin of government. How do you increase your staff skills? How do you find the right people that can do these next generation things and keep your organization moving? That is an issue. Legacy technology, right? I don't have to tell you that there are probably in some of your organizations mainframes that are 40 years old, right? And they work, but don't touch them, and then departments are very siloed, right? One agency might be pretty innovative, they might invest on something, they've got a platform, another agency has another platform. I used to joke that, to avoid vendor lock-in, we bought one of everything. And you kind of see that, we have all the analytics platforms. It's like, okay, we don't need all the analytics platforms, we need one, maybe two. And there's no overall strategy. There's nothing tying it together. So these are the kind of things that you want to think about of where do you see your pain points in this, right? Where are the things you can leverage and change, and where are the things you can't? Procurement probably can't change it much, right? Funding, well, you need a champion to go to the budget and hope with that, but, hope for the best. Try to be open source, try to be low cost, try to do those sort of things, and find the opportunities through partnerships and other stuff. So how can you attack these problems? All right, so things you can do. This is how you need to start thinking of this as you go forward, right? So the technology is changing fast. It's not going to wait, right? Like, it's AI, I'm very bullish on, and it's going to come fast. It's going to change so much in how we think about things as it develops. You got to get out there and you got to move fast because it is not going to wait. Embrace change, embrace the chaos, disrupt, whatever you want to call it. But you need to be forward thinking. You can't just wait because it's not going to wait, right? And you'll fall further behind. You're the gatekeepers in your organization. If you're here and if you're listening to me rattle on about this stuff, you're at least thinking about this, hopefully. So what are you bringing back to an organization that may be ready or not ready? And how do you get them ready to move forward, right? How do you get them ready to change? These are some of the things. And then think about this holistically. This is not a technology problem. And I think that becomes the issue where the champions of this so often are technologists, be they vendors, be they civic tech, academics, or even people in government. The technologists are often leading with this, and this is not strictly a technology problem, right? You need technology. You need the CIO, you need the analytics people, you need the security people, but you also need your chief counsel, right? You need legal advice. As much as the lawyers can muck things up and make it take forever, do not surprise them. They hate surprises. So get them involved early. Get them involved often. Make sure you're covering yourself from a compliance point of view and keeping things moving, right? And then your business units, right? Go back to the business cases of making sure that technology you build actually gets used. There was a saying I picked up from the Open Knowledge Foundation years ago that it was about open data, and he said, open data becomes open knowledge when it is useful, usable, and used. And I really like that, and I don't think it's just about data. I think that's about any technology, a website, a mobile app, sensors, autonomous vehicles, whatever. If it's useful, usable, and used, then you're doing right. And you need all of those people, right? You need good design, you need solid tech, you need good security, you need legal, you need a good business case, you need champions, you need community engagement, you need all those pieces to really make any smart city technology useful, usable, and used. And I think that is a very important thing that sort of gets neglected. So have that vision. Last point there is know your vision. Start with that. Like if you have ideas, how do you start building on that? Somebody in the organization has an idea or, it'd be really great if we could do X or Y. How do we get done? Start running with that. Find those champions. Find those people that want to do these cool things. And then start building that vision. Start moving on it because the tech is going to keep going, everything's going to advance, and you will be behind. So things to know, things to think about as you're doing this, right? Obviously, I put first and foremost, know your data, right? Like this is important. How many people who are here who work in a government agency know what data you even have? Never mind what data another agency has, right? What data could another agency or department offer to you that would help your operations, your cost control, collaboration? You don't even know. Like I would tell people, hire a good data engineer and hire a librarian and set them free to find all your data. You'll learn a whole bunch of stuff you didn't know existed. That's important. Know your data. Know your people, right? A lot of people in government have worked there a long time, right? I worked 10 years in government and I feel like I'm still the new guy, right? So rely on them. Listen to them. What are their problems? What are their needs? What are their possibilities? What do they get excited about? I've seen places where there's been a shift. We're going to do something different. We're going to change how we do business and IT. And a lot of people are like, okay, I do AS400 mainframes. What am I going to do now? I'm like, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to do mainframe stuff until you retire? Or do you want to try something new? You want to get involved in analytics? You want to do open data, visualization, app development? The opportunities are there, and sometimes people don't even realize what's possible, right? So know your people, know what skills they have, know what they're actually interested in that might not be their day-to-day job. Find those opportunities. I think there's a lot of them and a lot of possibility to find talent that you don't even know you have. So I think that's important. Laws and regulations, again, back to the lawyers, right? Have them at the table, knowing what you're doing, knowing where the risks are, and knowing how to mitigate those risks, right? That's just cover yourselves. That's very, very important. Internal policy gaps, right? Say you have a chat bot. Great, very exciting, new level of digital engagement, community's happy with this. Oh wait, it's suddenly swearing at constituents. What do you do, right? How do you roll back things that people are dependent on, right? Like, they had that Twitter bot a few years ago that turned into swearing and racism and all kinds of awful things in 24 hours. You don't want that. What if something bad happens? Do you have the policies to cover how you interact with things when things go wrong? What's your rollback? What's your fallback plan? How do you manage that? Think about your data again, right? So, and what you're buying. The technology black box. Put your data in one end, solution comes out the other, right? It's magic. It's not magic. It works somehow. Algorithms have issues, and you need to know how they work. Explainable AI is important. Explainable technology is important, right? Know what you're buying. Know what you can do with it, what you can't do with it, what it's capable of in 6 months or a year, in 5 years. You're not going to be able to buy systems in government and be like, hey, I know we bought this thing last year, but there's this new thing that's really awesome. We should buy this. Your budget people are going to laugh you right out of the room. Be like, nope, you got to keep that for 10 years. So doing that, so know what you're buying and know what it can do, right? Know what control you give up. And this goes back to my thing with the partnerships. If you were partnering with, a university, a nonprofit, a for-profit, whatever, know what you're giving to them. What do you bring to the table other than, oh, well, we're going to install some things on our light poles, or we're going to do this. Like, what is the data you're giving up? Can you give it up? What are your obligations for public records laws and retention and those sort of things? Can you cover your legal obligations with that data if you have a service provider that's holding it all? Maybe, maybe not, right? So think about that stuff. Who owns and has rights to that data? Cloud and service providers are important and they're a big part of the portfolio. But when the contract is up and if you don't renew, do they hand all your data back to you? Maybe. You hope so. Better have it in writing, right? Better have that and know whose data it is, who can use it, who can disclose it, and under what, situations, right? That's important. You can get yourself in real trouble, right? And the last piece is know your taxonomy. Really know what you have, what you don't, what you call things, right? Like this was always a case that comes up in questions about data standards, where you call it X, I call it Y. Okay, what do we do, right? Like, well, we'll call it Z now, and now nobody knows what we're talking about. Well, that's not helpful, right? So how do you come up with a common taxonomy, right? I had to throw a philosophy quote of, Wittgenstein, the limits of my language are the limits of my world, right? So as you're dealing with departments trying to navigate and collaborate, have a common language, have a common data set, have a common set of words, so you have things that you can start to bridge that gap, right? How you measure things is really important, but if you're not measuring things in the same way, what are you comparing, right? All right, some more stuff. Don't be afraid to have a strong vision, right? Go further. Like, really get creative, right? Do some interesting stuff. Start building a broad coalition of support, be that internal and external, right? You're gonna need friends. You can't do this alone. I tried, it was ugly. Well, don't do that. Find a champion, department leader, executive, whoever in the organization, right? Not all organizations are gonna be ready to move and excited about the possibilities. Some are gonna be like, I've been doing this 40 years and this is what I do. I'm not interested. Find the people who are. There are some people who are interested. Start with what you know, right? You wanted to get into data science, but you don't have any data scientists. You probably have some people that are good at Excel, right? Good at stats, good at SAS or SPSS or R. Start with what you know, build from there, right? Form partnerships as you needed, right? Like I said, I'm skeptical about them sometimes, but I think they can be really powerful if you know what you want to get out of them and you know what you're putting in, then you can have a real honest relationship about it. Think in a modular fashion. Additive architecture is something a former engineer of mine called it, of build today with a vision towards what you want to build tomorrow. And then build pieces on top of that and expand, right? You're not going to go and buy a $100 million system, build it all, it's out of date by the time it's done, and then in 10 years you have to start over again. That's no good. That's not going to move the needle and deliver the kind of service consistently that you want for your constituents. So build that modular piecemeal, but make sure all those pieces can work together. Have a flexible roadmap that handle changes, right? Think Agile, Scrum, all those project management tools, but think about how things are changing and how new technologies or new needs from your constituents might influence where you need to pivot. Focus on business and constituent value, right? If you're just doing stuff for tech's sake, I mean, that's fun too, but think of your constituents, think about the business, think about how you drive that value. And then be creative with finding funding sources, right? Don't just think about, budget and operations and capital or, grants. The city of Boston, when I last did their open data program, we got a $500,000 grant for winning the Knight Foundation News Challenge. Hey, that was really helpful. That went pretty far, right? So think about those alternative grants and different opportunities to bring money in to, get you up and get you going. Those are important. So we come back to this quote, right? We shape buildings thereafter to shape us, right? And you abstract that out to cities. We shape cities. We shape communities. The technology changes how we interact. The former mayor of Boston's director of constituent engagement, I was on and on about data one day, and he's like, the mayor doesn't care about data. He cares about people. And as the data guy, I was like, oh, come on, that hurts. But I thought about it, and I'm like, you know what? The data is about people. The technology is for people. It's used by people. It tells the stories and forms how we interact with each other, with how we interact with government services, how we interact with the environment around us, what we expect from it, and we want those expectations to be higher and met, right? So how are we shaping that through these smart city technologies? How are we taking these things and wanting them to shape the communities we want to live in, right? That we want to be successful in good places to be ourselves, our children, our friends, businesses, right? Like, how are we shaping that, right? It's not just about parking or lighting or public safety. Those are all good. But how do you put it all together and use that to shape the world we want to live in, and then us as the people in that world shape the technology back? And with that, thank you very much. And any questions, everyone?
All right, questions. So I'll ask one. I'll take moderator privilege. So what are you most excited about looking forward? You listed a whole bunch of cool technologies, cool applications. Kind of what has you most excited right now?
As a data person, I would have to say AI is the biggest thing. And it's not, I'm not too worried. I'm a little worried, but not too worried about the Terminator. But it's more, as these things become ubiquitous in our lives, how is that going to change? Like the example of the autonomous vehicles and people ignoring crosswalks. As other technologies change, how are our behaviors going to change, right? How are we going to adapt in that world? The protests in Hong Kong have been fascinating, right? They're walking around with laser pointers and stuff, blinding facial recognition cameras. That is fascinating in how it changes our behavior. And it's really that intersection of technology and behavior that's interesting.
Cool. Question over here.
Sure. My question is, there's lots of data out there, but how important is to have continuous connectivity or connectivity across the whole world? Like, for instance, if you look back in the 40s and we built the highways across the United States, and all of a sudden, boom, economies took off because you could get transportation. Where are you seeing the connectivity to allow all this data to be transferred from place to place? And just some thoughts about that.
I think that is super important. I think the data sort of, we'll say, revolution of the last decade is a direct product of the .com explosion 20 years ago, right? Like suddenly we had digital apps and retail and all of these things, and suddenly now you're producing data as an artifact. I think that connectivity is going to be increasingly important, but it's not there yet because we don't know what to do with the data that we have. I mean, unless you're Google or Facebook or, a large tech company that has that sort of capacity to do those sort of things. If you're a small government, doing that kind of high-end stuff is not easy, right? So I think it's going to be increasingly important to have that connectivity and that stream of data as the capacity to use it builds up, right? And I think there's a lag there right now.
Okay, over here.
I didn't hear, and maybe I missed it, I didn't hear where you discussed the issue around ethics and implicit bias, because a lot of the technologies that you show up there that are like surveillance technologies, facial recognition technologies, artificial intelligence are really showing some problems from a bias standpoint.
Yep.
So where do ethics fall into this?
So I've been having this debate in some other forums lately about exactly this. It's not a tech question, it's a people question, right? The tech is only going to be as ethical as we are. I was having this debate with one of my colleagues, and they're like, AI ethics, it's going to be the hot thing. I'm like, really? That's great, because in the philosophy realm, I'm not sure we've even figured out ethics at all, never mind ethics in technology, right? And ethics is really community-driven, right? The ethics here in Raleigh are probably slightly different than where I live in Boston, and certainly different than they might be in the Netherlands, and very different than they will be in Singapore. So that sort of, what do we mean by that? I don't think is, at this point, able to be encapsulated in the technology. It's all about the oversight, it's all about the governance, and if you're talking about AI and machine learning and the data science part, there's now a movement towards explainable AI, and I think that is a more important thing that will help with that, the ethics questions, because if someone could explain what the algorithm is doing and how it's reacting and how it makes decisions consistently, then the community is now empowered to think about that and say, well, do we want that? Does that work for our community values? I think that's where the ethics and the stuff comes, of making sure that we keep the human element in it. I don't know that there's another way other than having explainable technology met with proper oversight and community involvement.
All right, and each of us are responsible to do our part towards that. So let's thank Curt for a fantastic talk. Thank you.